Welcome to Building My Legacy podcast. This podcast is designed for leaders and entrepreneurs who want to leave a legacy and will provide strategies that focus upon key elements for legacy creation, determining your desired impact and its benefit, increasing your legacy's reach by engaging key stakeholders, planning, prioritizing, and executing. Here's your host, Dr. Lois Sonstegard.
Welcome, everybody, to our fifth podcast, or fourth. It is our fourth in our series on how to navigate the corporate world. I'm here again with Karen Whitaker, and we are talking today about innovation. How do we get innovation? And so much of innovation is based on people's ability to contribute and their sense of being engaged. So, Karen, share with us, what's been your experience? What have you found impacts people's ability to give suggestions and to input into what's really happening?
Well, it's about creating an environment where people feel safe to do so. And oftentimes, we're not paying enough attention to the environment that we're creating. We're on task to meet goals and objectives and to manage the day-to-day, and not really aware of what kind of environment we're creating for our direct reports or those that we're interacting with. So I think that's where it starts, is just an awareness and dedication to ensuring that there is an environment like that.
So having that environment is so important, but we talk about it, but how do you create it? How do you begin to make it so that it's safe or that people can really share and give input?
Mm-hmm. So I think it's setting up situations where you're soliciting feedback and different ideas. And then two, it's in your reaction to them. Because how you react determines how much people open up and how much they make suggestions and how much they give input. All too often that can be squashed by a negative reaction. And then, all of a sudden all the hands that were raised lower, right? For me, I had an example, I think in podcast 2, about that, where I had raised a question at in a meeting that where they were delivering the sales strategy. And it was a very valid question to the topic, but it was perceived as conflicting to the direction we were giving, even though it was just really, like I said, a valid question. And it wasn't received very well. And after that, there was very little, if no, feedback from the group. And afterward, many people came up to me and thanked me for asking the question, because they had the same question as well and wanted to raise the same concerns. So again, it's making a conscious effort to set up that environment, and then being aware of how you react to feedback or ideas and suggestions.
Isn't it amazing? We have meetings to get input and to solve problems so we can push the needle further down the path, right?
That's what
But if we have everybody sitting in the meeting going like this,
mm-hmm.
What did we accomplish? Why do we have a meeting?
Right.
And people leave asking that question. Go ahead.
Yeah. So, tying this back to, engagement, employee engagement, that's I think that's what we really need to focus on. It's in these environments where we can lose people very easy. People want to be fulfilled at work. They want to feel like they have a voice. They want to feel like they're a part of the plan. So if from an employee engagement perspective, this is one major factor that can play into that.
Karen, you've done some really interesting things with creating safe zones, but also really looking at what it is that people need and want. I want to share what some of those things are, because I think they're they're very thoughtful, and I think it is what people are looking for, but we don't talk about it much.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it was probably a year into managing my team where I realized that I wanted to get a pulse for the team, where they were they happy in their roles, what other ideas or did they have for departmental changes that can help the team be more successful. And unfortunately, I didn't have those tools available to me. That wasn't something that the company trained or provided tools on. So I looked outside the organization to other leaders and did my own research and came across a thing called a stay interview. All too often, a common business practice is to do an exit interview. Well, by that time, I mean, it's great that they do because, you can solicit good feedback and perhaps make some changes based on that if you see patterns. But it's a little too late at that point. Right. So a stay interview is conducted during frequency, probably, once a year, opposite of performance reviews is what's suggested. And it's an opportunity to check in with your direct report. Are they fulfilled in their role? Are they, do they feel valued? Are they, what changes would they like to see departmental wise? And also an opportunity to solicit feedback about my performance as a manager. And as uncomfortable as it was the first go around, because when you're not used to that kind of practice of and that kind of an engagement, you can probably be a little reserved, but very quickly, when we put this into regular practice, it became, they realized it was a safe zone. I was only doing that to improve their experience with me and with the company and hopefully retain them. So it's a retention tool as well.
It's so interesting that you talk about that because you're right. We spend a lot of time on exit interviews, but by then it's happened. They're gone. And we don't have the opportunity to change or to shift direction. And we might have if we had wanted to or could have. And so your example makes me think of some of the research that was done on what feedback really provides. And one of the things that Daniel Coyle talks about is with the ship Benfold. The captain of that was a ship that was underperforming. It was one of the poorer performing ships. And then when the captain came on, he decided that he was going to ask everybody 3 questions. He took 6 weeks to ask these questions of every single sailor on board. What is it that we do well? What do we do badly? And if you were me, what would you do differently? Mm-hmm. And it seems so simple, doesn't it? And just by asking those questions in 3 years, that the rating of the ship's performance moved into the top tier. So it's so simple, but it takes time. He took time out to do that, and that's what you did. You took time out to ask those questions. How did people respond to that? Did they trust your questions?
Like I said, the first, I got a lot of funny looks the first go round. And I think it was just when I proposed the idea. Once we got into the questions, and I had to prod a little bit. I'm not going to lie to you. But once it became more of a practice, and they understood that even some of their ideas were implemented, or that there was effort to implement their ideas and to change things according to their feedback, I took it very serious, and that built trust.
Really, yeah,
and really allowed them to open up and be comfortable with the whole practice.
What's interesting about that also is it's what millennials are asking for. Can I have input into this organization and how it's running.
Mm-hmm.
And think of it right now, only 1 out of 10 millennials are fully engaged at work. 9 are looking for another job while they're working for you. So they've come with their loyalties already split.
Mm-hmm.
So if you bring them in and address those needs, all you've done is accelerated that revolving door.
And with, you bring up the millennial generation, and that is the resume of people staying 8-10 years with a company. That company loyalty that's no longer the norm. The norm is 2 to 3 years, and it's because of this generation saying, okay, if I'm not getting what I want, I'm moving. I'm going to move. And not even just that generation. I mean, be honest with you, I'm learning a lot from millennials, and I'm looking at them going, if they can, why can't I? Which has caused me to change a lot of my thinking and recreating who I want to be in my career. I saw a statistic, the Gallup statistic, saying 52% of exiting employees at their manager or organization could have done something to prevent them from leaving. I mean, that's
amazing. 1 out of 2.
1 out of 2. And in a market where there are very few unemployed, it's a very competitive market for employees.
I think that the truly competitive companies in the future are going to be the ones who know how to keep employees, because there isn't going to be a pool to draw from, or the talent pool that you want to draw from, the level at which you want to draw. Those people have choices.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to go where it makes sense. And you're either going to pay an awful lot for that talent, or you're going to have to know how to treat them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Or both. And
you know what, that plays into another thing that I implemented with my team. I'm sure you have the statistics, but on development, and I know it's I don't know if it's 9 out of 10, but that is one thing that employees are looking for, even more so than financial or position or title. It's how are you going to develop me? And another thing that I implemented with my team, again, found this outside the organization, was an individual development plan. And because not everyone needs to develop in the exact same way. So as managing a team, if I wanted to, I could conduct training that could help the whole team elevate, right? Which I did, but also took the time to create an individual development plan based on, and this was a mutually agreed upon plan, ideas and input from both sides, so that we could come up with the plan that was, adherence to a plan like that needs buy-in on both sides, right? And that was something that, again, the team surprised the team. But once we got into the practice of it, they really saw that it was a practice that came from a good place. Truly looking to, I was invested in their career and wanted to see them succeed. And by doing something like that, it wasn't just to say you did or didn't do something, or you're not doing this right. It's about how can I position you for. So not everyone wants to move to the next level, but where they want to be, where they want to fit into the organization, how they want to be perceived by the organization.
So, Karen, that's a lot of effort and energy on the part of you as a manager, because you also, if you learn from them as to what they want for development, that there's an implication, that's something implied there, that you will also be open to helping to create opportunities and experiences for them, or contacts that will help guide them in that direction, right?
It does take a lot of time, and I'm not going to lie. I mean, it caused me to work nights and weekends because, business had to get done, right? But it was the kind of leader that I wanted to be and the kind of environment that I wanted to be a part of. And again, it was just out of true, I guess, commitment to creating the right kind of environment for my direct reports.
So as you did that, what were some of the results that you saw happening with your direct reports? How did they respond to what it was that you created and what you did?
We're happier.
Okay.
Therefore, making our interaction more genuine and pleasant. They were highly engaged. They were, when asked to work over and go above and beyond, it was without question. So
the productivity increased is what you're saying. And it's, in a sense, it's a free increase in productivity, right? Because it didn't cost you anything to do that other than your energy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that is something we don't measure well. We don't measure the energy that it takes to really be a great manager.
We don't. And that's another topic, right? For what does that look like? What does that model look like? It's another tool that's needed.
It is so true. Along with that, I mean, part of what you're also doing as you're meeting with people is you're giving people really important input into what's happening. So one of the things that we know, if you really want great innovation, you want processes, you want to develop products that are on the cutting edge, there's a certain amount of information that people need in order to be able to process and give the right input that actually addresses the innovation you're trying to achieve or the product you're trying to create, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's a matter of how do you make information accessible? And talk a little bit about that, if you would, because also I think one of the things that we see managers sometimes do is to withhold information in order to increase their power base. And so talk about that and its impact on innovation, if you would.
I think that's a big mistake. I believe if you're not transparent and people have questions, they fill in the gaps themselves. So it causes if they're not getting information or complete communication, they'll make it up. Is what I'm trying to say, right? And that can be inaccurate, and that causes fear and concern and an unstable environment. And so, I think it's very important that that you're as transparent as possible. I'm not saying that there are some things that I was aware of that yes could not be shared down the ranks, but being as transparent and as communicative as possible to make sure that they didn't have concerns with the direction because they didn't have the complete picture.
So in my opinion, there's two ways of dealing with information. That which needs to be kept close to the chest because it's very proprietary and it could injure the company if it were shared. That information needs to be held closely. And sometimes that's financial information. Sometimes those are deals that are in the process of coming down. Then there's information that is about what is it that we're thinking? What is it that we're developing? What are the problems we're trying to solve? Where is it that we're looking in terms of the next generation of product, knowledge, information? And we talk a lot about artificial intelligence, but the reality is even with robotics and machine learning, it has to have information put into it.
Mm-hmm.
We're the same as human beings. We need to have information put into us if we're to output. something really useful. And there are times where in organizations, in order to move within the organization, to grow your power base, so to speak, information is withheld. And that is not a criteria we often use in performance evaluation. Does this person withhold information? If so, they should be evaluated based on its negative input or impact on their ability as a leader, perhaps. But those kinds of measures generally are not part of our process. What's your experience with that?
I would agree with you, but I want to comment on that and how it impacts, how I've seen it impact the organization. Because we talked about productivity, right? And when I saw a decline in productivity, it was because people were unsure of the direction that the company, because at this point, if I'm doing this action, and I don't know if it's providing value to the company because it could be, the direction could be changing, then I'm not really bought in. I'm not passionate about it. I'm doing it as a matter of action because I have to, but you lose that engagement and you lose that productivity there. Because I'm just going to hold tight until I get that direction where I know where the company is going to go, so that I know that I'm having an impact towards that direction. Yeah, hearing you talk about that, that's what came to mind for me, is that as far as communication and making sure that there's sometimes I couldn't avoid it. I mean, I didn't have the direction, right? But then at that time, it was my job to then manage how my team felt, right? So within those times where I diverted them to, it was about, I guess, building team morale and letting them know that as soon as I knew or this is customary for at this point, just giving them some comfort, understanding that things are okay at this time. Like it's okay. We can survive the gray, right?
So part of what as I'm listening to you, part of what we don't do when we give reports back, and I've been at fault with this too, is to say, this is the context within which I'm operating. These are the assumptions I'm working with because this is what I'm understanding are our goals, where we're trying to go and how we're proceeding, right? And I think sometimes reviewing that when we're reporting off on something can be valuable, because sometimes the manager above us or the leader above, it's been a year since they communicated that context, and maybe it's changed. Mm-hmm. And they hear it and they go, oh, wow, no. That was 6 months ago. But now when you give your report, everybody understands why it's off.
Right.
Or why you haven't been moving in the direction that you need to. And context, I think, is so important. And it's our job to let people know what that is, because otherwise they don't know how to respond.
I have a great example to that, actually. My team they were measured, their variable comp was based on MBOs, so managed business objectives. And when I first became the manager of the department, it was basically an open box. You just fill it in. What did they do? Which I thought was so subjective, and there was, it was very difficult to rate the team consistently because there were so many other different variables. So I created an MBO form that gave them specifics. So we had 4 different buckets. Within those buckets, it was specific activities and that we were looking towards, and then a rating system of 1 to 5. So very new for the team. And of course, my manager wrote the MBOs. It was a collaborative effort to come up with those based on what we thought that we wanted to see in performance. And we implemented this, and it was like, again, new for the team. So anything new, change is difficult, met with a little bit of resistance. And so what I did halfway through the evaluation period is I gave them the MBO and I said, rate yourself. Because otherwise it's me saying, based off of my viewpoint, this is how I feel like you're doing. And I may not be aware of everything because I'm not with you every single day, right? I manage a team that was not in the same building. They were all over the country. So by giving them the opportunity to rate themselves, and then we would sit down and I would ask them, because, you know, I looked for variances between what I saw and some of them had some really compelling arguments as to why they may be rated higher. Or maybe they rated themselves lower where I was giving them higher rating. And it was because from my, I guess, vantage point, that's what I thought. So it was a really interesting exercise, getting that feedback. And it also allowed them to buy into the process. So that was another thing as far as you're talking about, you know, getting feedback or how did you phrase it? Reviewing.
Creating the context. Yeah.
Right. And then the other thing was, as we changed the MBOs, because obviously that was the first time we'd done it, then we want to change. So now strategy, the direction of the company has changed. So we have to make some changes to it. That allowed them to have or allowed me to ensure that they really understood the shift in strategy based on how they rated themselves. If that makes sense.
So what you were doing was decreasing the perception gap between what the people working for you, under you, had of what their job responsibilities were and what you knew them to be. So you could bridge that gap for them.
Right.
So, you know, so much of what you've done is really looking at how do you become that bridge? So one of the things that Odeon talked about a lot, this is an old piece of research from him many years back, but looking at the fact that, and there are other people that have talked about this since, and that is, when people don't perform, why is it that they're not performing? Yes, it may be that there's something innately off with their capabilities, abilities, skills, knowledge, whatever. But often there's something else. And what is that something else? But we tend to go right away to the easy, which is you didn't do it because you don't know how.
Mm-hmm.
And it may have been you didn't know what needed to be done, or I didn't give you the tool or access to whatever that was really critical. Karen, our time always goes unbelievably fast. It's been 30 minutes since we started. And so I'm going to end this here, just reviewing from innovation, from what we've talked about today is so many different pieces, but part of it is, what is it that we're creating in terms of that safe space for people to really be able to provide input, and some ways in which you can do that. And you had some wonderful examples about the stay interview. I love that. And then the individual development plan. And then also taking a look at creating a context so people in upper management know what it is that you're working under. Because if the context has changed, they need to be reminded of the context in which you're operating so you can shift if necessary. And then it's, again, part of all of what we've talked about, the underlying theme is our ability to hear, our willingness to hear, and really listen. So thank you so much, Karen.
Thank you, Lois. You have this given an opportunity for someone to share their experiences, and I wish there were more people like you that were willing to invest in people and make sure that their experience and their voice is heard. So thank you for having me.
Oh, you're so welcome. And next week, our next podcast is going to be on what's the future leader or manager going to look like? What should they look like? We have all sorts of experiences and ideas, and let's begin to formulate that. And we'd love to know what you think and what you want. It is our ability to express it, to think on it, to look at what's possible that begins to create the new dynamic of the future. So we invite you to be a part of this voice. We want to hear what you have to think about this and what your experience has been. So email us, let us know. And thank you so much for listening to us. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Building My Legacy podcast with Dr. Lois Sonstegard. To book your appointment with Dr. Sonstegard, visit www.buildtomorrow.com.